My name is Emily. I'm 18, and I live in a small town where everyone knows everyone else, and every corner has been explored. I have always felt that this place is just a starting point, but I never knew how to get out of it. I'm a dreamer, looking for something more than the usual streets, school, and work in a local cafe. But recently something has changed. Something invisible, but very real, started to invade my life. And now I realize that my dreams of escape can become a reality. But the price may be much higher than I ever imagined. I woke up to the sound of my alarm clock going off for the 5th minute in a row. Its sharp signal cut through the silence of my room, and I turned it off with a sigh. It was dawn outside the window. The sun was barely rising above the horizon, flooding the streets of my small town with soft golden light. I went to the window and looked at the familiar landscape. Old trees that had been there since my childhood, quiet streets with identical houses, where every corner had been explored long ago. Even the air seemed the same as yesterday, and the day before, and the year before. I got dressed in my usual sweater and jeans and went to the kitchen. Mom was already preparing breakfast. The smell of coffee and fried eggs filled the room. She smiled at me, but I could see a slight worry in her eyes. My father was sitting at the table, immersed in a newspaper. His face was as serious as ever. My younger brother, Ethan, was already sitting in the corner with his laptop, playing a game. He didn't even look at me when I sat down at the table. "Good morning, Emily," my mom said, placing a plate of scrambled eggs in front of me. "Good morning," I replied, but my voice was not enthusiastic. I ate in silence, listening to my father turn the pages of the newspaper and Ethan coo under his breath from time to time. It was an ordinary morning in our house, just like any other morning, but something inside me felt wrong, like I was out of place, like I was waiting for something that would never come. After breakfast, I took my backpack and left the house. The air was fresh, but even it seemed the same as always. I was going to the school where I spent the last few years of my life. The school was old, made of bricks that had already begun to crack, but no one was in a hurry to repair it. Why? "Everything works fine," the locals said, and it was true. Everything was working. But was it enough? At school, I met Sarah, my best friend. She had always been the opposite of me, cheerful, energetic, with a constant desire to do something. She ran up to me with a big smile. "Emily, did you hear? There's a party tonight at an old house in the neighborhood. You're coming, right?" I hesitated. The old house on the outskirts of town had always seemed creepy to me. It had been abandoned for many years, and even the children avoided it. But Sarah insisted, "You can't stay at home all the time, Emily. You need to live. It will be fun, I promise." I agreed, but I felt anxious. Something about this house seemed dangerous to me, but I couldn't explain why. Maybe it was just fear of the unknown, or maybe it was something more. The evening of that day came quickly. I stood in front of the mirror in my room, trying to make myself up. Sarah insisted that I look special, so I put on a black skirt and a blazer that I had once bought, but never dared to wear. My reflection in the mirror seemed a bit alien, as if I was trying to pass myself off as someone else. But I sighed and decided that it was normal. Maybe this is how change begins. Sarah picked me up at 8 o'clock. She was wearing a bright dress that glowed in the dark and had enough energy for 10 people like me. "You look great," she exclaimed as I got into the car. "Thank you," I mumbled. trying to hide my excitement. The old house on the outskirts of town looked even more eerie in the dark. The tall trees around it cast long shadows that seemed alive. The windows of the house were lighted, and music was coming from inside. I felt my heart beat faster. The house was full of people. Some were dancing, some were laughing, some were just standing in the corner holding a bottle of drink. The air was thick with the smell of perfume, alcohol, and something else. Something unusual. I couldn't put my finger on what it was, but it made me feel slightly uncomfortable. Sarah immediately pulled me to the dance floor. We laughed, danced, and for a while, I forgot about my worries. But then I noticed him. He was standing in the corner, leaning against the wall, looking straight at me. He was tall, with dark hair and penetrating eyes that seemed to see right through me. I felt my body tense. Who was he? I had never seen him before. Sarah caught my eye and smiled. "This is Jake. He's new in town. Do you want me to introduce you?" Before I could answer, she was already pulling me toward him. Jake smiled as we approached. His smile was warm, but there was something different in his eyes. Something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "Hi, Emily," he said, and his voice was soft, but there was a certain strength to it. "Hi," I replied, trying not to look embarrassed. We talked all night. Jake told me about his travels, the places he had seen, the people he had met. His words were like magic, and I felt my heart fill with something new, something I couldn't name. But suddenly, I felt someone looking at me. I turned around and saw Matthew, my ex-boyfriend. He was standing in the shadows, his face grim and his eyes burning with anger. I felt a chill run through my body. "Emily, are you okay?" asked Jake, noticing my reaction. "Yeah, I'm fine," I answered, but my voice was uncertain. Suddenly, the lights go out. In the darkness, someone is screaming. I feel something cold touching my arm, and I can barely hold back a scream. When the light returns, I see that Matthew has disappeared. No one knows where he went. The next day, the town was on edge. Matthew's disappearance became the main topic of conversation. The police arrived early in the morning, and I saw them questioning people on the streets. I felt guilty, although I couldn't understand why. After all, I hadn't done anything. But I was the last person to see him before he disappeared. I was sitting on a bench outside the school when Sarah came over. She looked worried. "Emily, are you okay? You look nervous." "I don't know, Sarah. Something is not right. I feel like it has something to do with me." Sarah sat down next to me and took my hand. "It's not your fault. Matthew probably just went somewhere to cool off. You know how he was emotional. But I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. I remembered the look in his eyes that night, the anger, the pain, and something else, like he was trying to warn me. Meanwhile, my relationship with Jake continued to grow. He was attentive, caring, but sometimes I noticed his eyes grow cold when he thought I wasn't looking. One day I asked him, "Jake, do you know anything about what happened to Matthew?" He paused for a moment and then smiled. "No, Emily, but don't worry. He probably just decided to leave. Sometimes people do that." His words sounded convincing, but something in his voice made me doubt him. That evening I came home earlier than usual. My parents were sitting in the living room, and their faces were gloomy. My mom was holding an old photo that I had never seen before. "What is this?" I asked, sitting down next to her. Mom looked at me, and there was pain in her eyes. "This is your aunt. Emily. She died many years ago. I took the photo in my hands. There was a young woman who looked like a copy of me. Next to her was a young man I did not know. His face was disfigured by pain. "Who is that?" I asked, pointing to the man. My father sighed. "That's Jacob. He was her lover. But after she died, he disappeared." I felt my heart sink. Jacob. Jake. Could it be a coincidence? I couldn't sleep that night. The photo my mom had shown me was haunting me. I lay in bed, imagining the face of that woman who looked so much like me. Who was she? And why had no one ever told me about her? Suddenly I heard a whisper. At first, I thought it was the wind outside the window, but then I realized that the sound was coming from the hallway. I got out of bed and carefully left the room. The whispering was getting louder, and I realized that it was my parents' voices. They were arguing. "We have to tell her the truth," my mom said, her voice strained. "We can't." "It's too dangerous," my father replied. I pressed myself against the wall, trying to hear more.